My name is Alex, and I live in Harmony Glades, a neighborhood where the lawns are always green, the houses are painted in approved shades of beige, and the only surprises are the monthly HOA fees. Harmony Glades wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an institution, a well-oiled machine of perfectly manicured lawns and meticulously planned social events. Every house looked the same, every bush was trimmed just so, and every resident knew the HOA rulebook better than their own phone number. Living here was an experience. I moved in because it was affordable and close to my work, but I quickly learned that affordability came at a price: conformity. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was the supreme ruler of Harmony Glades. They dictated everything from the color of your mailbox to the height of your grass. Heaven forbid you left your trash cans out for more than a few hours after pickup, you'd be slapped with a fine faster than you could say, property value. The rulebook was thicker than a dictionary, filled with regulations about everything imaginable. Seriously, there were rules about the acceptable number of holiday decorations, not too many, not too few, the types of flowers you could plant, must be approved varieties, and even the acceptable volume level for outdoor conversations. Apparently, laughter was a potential noise violation. Now, I'm not a rebellious person by nature. I generally believe in following the rules. It makes life easier, right? But even I found the HOA's grip on Harmony Glades a bit suffocating. It felt like living in a museum where everything was behind glass and you weren't allowed to touch anything. The HOA president, a woman named Gladys Kravitz, though everyone just called her HOA Karen, behind her back, was the enforcer of all these rules. She took her job very seriously, patrolling the neighborhood in her golf cart, armed with a clipboard and a laser focus on any infraction, no matter how small. A slightly overgrown hedge. A misplaced garbage can. Gladys would be there, clipboard in hand, ready to issue a warning. She was thorough. Let's just say Gladys had a reputation. She knew everyone's business, and she wasn't afraid to share her opinions, especially if she thought you were violating some obscure HOA regulation. Most people tried to avoid her at all costs. So, living in Harmony Glades meant walking on eggshells. It meant carefully measuring your grass height, choosing your flowers wisely, and always, remembering to bring in your trash cans promptly. It was a constant balancing act between wanting to express yourself and wanting to avoid the wrath of HOA Karen. And that's where my little tomato garden comes in. It was my small act of rebellion, my tiny splash of color in a sea of beige conformity. Little did I know, it would also be the start of a very strange and surprisingly spicy adventure. Amidst the perfectly sculpted lawns and identical flower beds of Harmony Glades, my little tomato garden was a splash of vibrant, unruly life. It wasn't much, just a small patch of earth in my backyard, about the size of a picnic blanket. But to me, it was a sanctuary, a place where I could escape the rigid rules and regulations of the HOA and connect with something real. I'd always loved gardening, ever since I was a kid helping my grandma tend her vegetable patch. There's something incredibly satisfying about nurturing a plant from a tiny seed to a bountiful harvest. It's a reminder that even in the most controlled environments, nature finds a way to thrive. So, when I moved into Harmony Glades, one of the first things I did was stake out a spot for my tomato garden. I knew it would be a challenge, given the HOA's strict rules about landscaping, but I was determined to make it work. I carefully researched approved tomato varieties, making sure to choose ones that were known for their compact growth and tidy appearance. I even submitted a detailed planting plan to the HOA, just to be on the safe side. The process of creating the garden was a labor of love. I spent hours tilling the soil, adding compost and fertilizer to give my plants the best possible start. I built a small fence around the perimeter to keep out any curious critters, and I carefully spaced each plant to ensure they had plenty of room to grow. I chose a variety of tomatoes, juicy red beefsteaks for sandwiches, sweet yellow cherry tomatoes for salads, and even a few heirloom varieties with quirky shapes and unique flavors. Each plant was like a little project, and I took pride in watching them grow taller and stronger each day. Watering the garden became a daily ritual. I'd wake up early in the morning, before the sun got too hot, and gently water each plant, making sure to soak the soil without splashing the leaves. I'd also spend time weeding, carefully removing any unwanted plants that threatened to steal nutrients from my precious tomatoes. As the plants grew, I added stakes to support their heavy branches, laden with ripening fruit. I pruned the leaves to encourage air circulation and prevent disease. I even talked to my tomatoes, offering words of encouragement and praise. I know it sounds silly, but I truly believed it helped them grow. Finally, after weeks of hard work and dedication, the first tomatoes began to ripen. The bright red and yellow fruits were like little jewels, glistening in the sunlight. I couldn't wait to taste the fruits of my labor. They were so much better than anything you could buy in a store. They were bursting with flavor, sweet and tangy and incredibly fresh. Sharing them with friends and neighbors was a joy. Everyone loved the taste of homegrown tomatoes. My little garden wasn't just a hobby, it was a passion, a source of joy, and a connection to something bigger than myself. It was, quite simply, my pride and joy. One morning, I went out to the garden, eager to harvest a few ripe beefsteaks for a BLT sandwich. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I could practically taste the juicy, homegrown goodness. But as I approached my tomato plants, my heart sank. One of my prize-winning beefsteak tomatoes, a big, beautiful red one that had been practically begging to be picked, was gone. Vanished. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where the tomato had been, utterly bewildered. Had I imagined it? Had I already picked it and forgotten? No, I was sure of it. I remembered admiring its perfect shape and vibrant color just the day before. It had definitely been there. My first thought was animals. We had squirrels, rabbits, and even the occasional deer wandering through the neighborhood. Maybe one of them had developed a taste for homegrown tomatoes. It seemed plausible. I inspected the area around the plant, looking for clues. There were no signs of disturbance, no broken branches, no telltale footprints. Whatever had taken the tomato had done so cleanly and efficiently. This made me think it was more likely a squirrel than a deer, since deer are generally less delicate. Determined to protect my remaining tomatoes, I decided to take preventative measures. I went to the local hardware store and bought some netting to cover the plants. It was a bit of an eyesore, but I figured it was better than losing all my hard work to hungry critters. I carefully draped the netting over the tomato plants, making sure to secure it tightly to the fence. I also sprinkled some cayenne pepper around the base of the plants, hoping to deter any animals that might be tempted to nibble on the fruit. I'd heard that squirrels didn't like the taste of cayenne pepper, and I was willing to try anything. Feeling a bit more confident, I went back inside, hoping that my tomatoes were now safe and sound. I kept a close eye on the garden over the next few days, checking the netting and the cayenne pepper to make sure everything was still in place. I even set up a motion-activated sprinkler system to scare away any unwanted visitors. For a few days, it seemed like my preventative measures were working. No more tomatoes disappeared. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I had solved the mystery of the missing beefsteak. Maybe it really was just a squirrel, and maybe the netting and cayenne pepper had done the trick. But then, a few days later, it happened again. Another tomato, this time a perfectly ripe yellow cherry tomato, was gone. And this time, I was starting to suspect it wasn't just an animal. Something else was going on. Something stranger. And the thought of HOA Karen started creeping into my mind. Could she possibly be the culprit? It seemed crazy, but in Harmony Glades, anything was possible. The disappearances continued, each one more baffling than the last. It wasn't just the ripe tomatoes anymore. Now, even the green, unripe ones were vanishing. It was as if someone had a vendetta against my entire tomato crop. My initial suspicion of animals faded. Squirrels and rabbits might nibble on a ripe tomato, but they wouldn't systematically clear out an entire garden, green fruit and all. No, this was the work of something, or someone, else. And that's when my gaze turned towards Gladys Kravitz, our beloved HOA Karen. Gladys lived next door, a woman whose life seemed dedicated to upholding the standards of Harmony Glades, one meticulously manicured lawn and perfectly aligned garbage can at a time. She was a permanent fixture on her porch, a silent sentinel watching over the neighborhood, ready to pounce on any infraction, no matter how minor. She had a reputation, to put it mildly. Stories about Gladys were legendary in Harmony Glades. There was the time she sent a strongly worded letter to Mrs. Henderson for having a slightly mismatched set of patio furniture. And the incident where she reported young Timmy Johnson for riding his bike on the sidewalk, a clear violation of HOA Bylaw 3.2b. And let's not forget the Great Gnome debacle of 2018, when she spearheaded a campaign to ban garden gnomes from the entire neighborhood, deeming them unsightly and detrimental to property values. It wasn't just her dedication to the rules that made her a suspect. It was also her nosiness. Gladys had a way of knowing everything that was going on in the neighborhood, even things that people tried to keep secret. She seemed to have an uncanny ability to spot even the smallest deviation from the norm. And my tomato garden, with its slightly unruly vines and vibrant colors, was definitely a deviation from the norm. It was a splash of chaos in a sea of conformity, a reminder that not everyone in Harmony Glades was willing to follow the rules to the letter. I started to notice things. Like how Gladys seemed to be spending an inordinate amount of time tending to her own garden, which, by the way, was a picture-perfect example of HOA-approved landscaping. Or how she always seemed to be outside watering her plants whenever I was out in my tomato garden. And the way she would always give me a little smirk whenever she saw me, as if she knew something I didn't. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Gladys was the tomato thief. It was crazy, I know. But in Harmony Glades, with its strict rules and nosy neighbors, anything was possible. Maybe she thought my tomatoes were violating some obscure HOA regulation. Maybe she was simply jealous of my green thumb. Or maybe she was just bored and looking for something to do. Whatever the reason, I was determined to find out the truth. And if Gladys was the culprit, I was going to catch her red-handed, or rather, red-faced. I knew I couldn't just accuse Gladys of tomato theft without any proof. That would be a surefire way to start a neighborhood war, and besides, I'm generally a pretty reasonable person. But the mounting evidence, combined with Gladys's general air of suspicion, was too much to ignore. I decided to confront her, subtly, of course. One sunny afternoon, I saw Gladys tending to her meticulously arranged petunias. I took a deep breath and strolled over, trying to appear casual and friendly. "Hi, Gladys," I said, forcing a smile. "Beautiful petunias. They're so uniform." Gladys beamed. "Thank you, Alex. I take great pride in my garden. It's important to maintain a certain standard, you know, for the sake of the neighborhood." "Absolutely," I replied, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "Speaking of gardens, I've been having a bit of a problem with mine. Some of my tomatoes have been disappearing." Gladys's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "Disappearing? How dreadful. Perhaps you have a pest problem. Those pesky squirrels can be quite the nuisance." "That's what I thought at first," I said, "but it seems like more than just squirrels. Even the green tomatoes are gone. It's very strange." I watched Gladys carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or deception. But she remained impassive, her face a mask of concern. "Oh, my dear, that is concerning," she said, shaking her head. "Have you considered putting up a fence? Or perhaps some netting? That usually deters the critters." "I've tried netting," I said, "but it doesn't seem to be working." I paused, then added, "I was just wondering if you'd noticed anything unusual around my garden lately. Any strange activity, perhaps?" Gladys looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Goodness, no, Alex. I'm usually inside during the day, working on my cross-stitch. I haven't seen a thing." "I see," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Well, thanks anyway, Gladys. I appreciate you keeping an eye out. Of course, dear, she said sweetly. Anything for a neighbor. I do hope you find out what's happening to your tomatoes. It's such a shame to see a garden go to waste. I left Gladys and her petunias, feeling more suspicious than ever. Her denial was too quick, too practiced. And those innocent eyes? I wasn't buying it. She was definitely hiding something. As I walked back to my house, I replayed the conversation in my head, searching for any clues I might have missed. I knew I couldn't prove anything, but I was convinced that Gladys was involved. And if she thought she could get away with stealing my tomatoes, she had another thing coming. It was time to take matters into my own hands. It was time to set up the camera. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for a little bit of revenge. Operation Tomato Trap was a go. I knew I needed solid evidence if I wanted to confront Gladys effectively, or even just to know for sure that I wasn't completely losing my mind. Accusations without proof would only make me look like the crazy neighbor, and that was the last thing I wanted. So, I went online and ordered a small, weatherproof security camera. It was designed to look like a rock, perfect for blending in with my garden decor. I even found some fake rocks that were nearly identical to the camera, placing them around the garden to help conceal it further. I wanted it to be completely undetectable. When the camera arrived, I spent the afternoon setting it up. It was surprisingly easy to use. I downloaded the app, connected the camera to my Wi-Fi, and adjusted the settings to record whenever it detected motion. I could even watch the live feed on my phone. Technology is amazing. The most challenging part was finding the perfect spot to place the camera. I needed a clear view of the tomato plants, but I also needed to make sure the camera was well hidden. After much deliberation, I decided to place it inside a large, ceramic planter that housed a particularly bushy tomato plant. The plant's leaves provided excellent camouflage, and the planter was positioned perfectly to capture any activity in the garden. I made sure the camera was fully charged and that the motion detection was working properly. I even tested it myself, walking around the garden to see if it would trigger the recording. It worked like a charm. Every time I moved, the camera started recording, sending a notification to my phone. With the camera in place, all I had to do was wait. I set the app to notify me whenever it detected motion, and I tried to go about my normal routine. It was difficult, though. I was constantly checking my phone, wondering if Gladys was about to make her move. The first night was uneventful. I received a few notifications from the camera, but it was just the wind rustling the leaves or a stray cat wandering through the yard. I was starting to get discouraged. Maybe I was wrong about Gladys. Maybe it really was just animals after all. But then, on the second night, at around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. The notification read, "Motion detected in garden." My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. I quickly opened the app and watched the live feed. At first, all I could see was darkness. But then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was small and hunched over, and it was definitely not an animal. As the figure got closer to the tomato plants, I gasped. It was Gladys. She was wearing a dark robe and carrying a small basket. And she was headed straight for my prize-winning beefsteak tomatoes. Operation Tomato Trap had been a success. I was finally going to catch the tomato thief. I watched, transfixed, as Gladys carefully selected the ripest tomatoes from my plants, placing them gently in her basket. She moved with a practiced ease, as if she had done this 100 times before. She even sniffed a few of them, choosing only the most fragrant and perfect specimens. The nerve! The camera footage was crystal clear. There was no doubt about it, it was definitely Gladys. Her face was illuminated by the faint moonlight, and her distinctive floral robe was unmistakable. I could even hear her humming softly as she worked, a bizarre lullaby for stolen tomatoes. A wave of emotions washed over me. First, there was vindication. I knew it. I wasn't crazy. Gladys was the tomato thief. All my suspicions had been confirmed. But then, the vindication turned to frustration. How dare she? How dare she sneak into my garden in the middle of the night and steal my hard-earned tomatoes? It wasn't just about the tomatoes themselves, it was about the principle of the thing. It was about the violation of my privacy, the disrespect for my property, and the sheer audacity of her actions. I paused the video and took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I knew I couldn't confront her right then and there. It was 2 a.m., and I didn't want to start a shouting match in the middle of the night. Besides, I needed to think about what I was going to say. I replayed the video several times, studying Gladys's movements, her expressions, her overall demeanor. She seemed so calm, so methodical, so utterly unrepentant. It was as if she genuinely believed she was entitled to my tomatoes. I imagined her back in her house, carefully arranging the stolen tomatoes in a bowl on her kitchen counter, admiring her ill-gotten gains. Maybe she was even planning to make a tomato salad, using my precious fruits to impress her friends at the next HOA meeting. The thought made my blood boil. I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to do something. But what? Confronting her directly would be satisfying, but it might also escalate the situation. I needed a plan, something that would not only expose her theft but also teach her a lesson. And that's when the idea struck me. A mischievous, slightly wicked idea that made me smile. If Gladys wanted my tomatoes so badly, then I would give her something she wouldn't forget. Something spicy. It was time to unleash the Carolina Reapers. It was time for Operation Spicy Revenge. The plan was simple, elegant, and diabolically satisfying. I would replace some of my ordinary tomatoes with Carolina Reaper peppers. For those unfamiliar, Carolina Reapers are among the hottest peppers in the world, boasting a Scoville heat unit rating that can reach over 2 million. That's about 200 times hotter than a jalapeno. One bite could set your mouth on fire for hours. The beauty of the plan was that the peppers looked almost identical to some of my red tomato varieties, especially when viewed in the dim light of my garden at night. Gladys, with her apparent lack of horticultural expertise, wouldn't be able to tell the difference until it was too late. Of course, I wouldn't want to cause her any serious harm. This was about teaching her a lesson, not inflicting pain. My plan was more about shock value and comedic effect than actual malice. I envisioned her biting into one of those peppers and experiencing a moment of intense, fiery regret. The first step was acquiring the Carolina Reapers. I couldn't exactly walk into my local garden center and ask for the hottest peppers they had. That would raise too many questions. So, I turned to the internet. I found a reputable online seed supplier that specialized in exotic peppers. They offered Carolina Reaper seedlings, ready to be transplanted into my garden. I placed an order, making sure to specify discreet packaging. I didn't want Gladys intercepting my spicy delivery. While I waited for the seedlings to arrive, I prepared my garden for their arrival. I carefully selected a few tomato plants that were growing particularly close together. I figured that would be the perfect spot to camouflage the Carolina Reapers. When the seedlings finally arrived, I was impressed. They were small but healthy, with vibrant green leaves and tiny, menacing-looking peppers already starting to form. I put on a pair of gloves and carefully transplanted the seedlings into my garden, placing them strategically among the tomato plants. I made sure to label each of the Carolina Reaper plants with a small, inconspicuous tag that only I could see. I also took a mental note of their exact location. I didn't want to accidentally pick one myself. That would be a disaster. With the Carolina Reapers planted, my garden was now a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode with spicy vengeance. All I had to do was wait for Gladys to make her next move. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she wouldn't be able to resist. The lure of my forbidden tomatoes was simply too strong. Operation Spicy Revenge was officially underway. And I couldn't wait to see the look on Gladys's face when she took her first bite. Growing Carolina Reapers is not for the faint of heart. These peppers are not your average bell peppers or even your run-of-the-mill jalapenos. They are fiery little devils that demand respect and caution. I want to be clear, if you're considering growing these peppers yourself, please proceed with extreme care. From the moment I transplanted the seedlings, I treated them with the utmost respect. I knew that even touching them could be dangerous. The oils from the peppers can easily transfer to your skin, causing a burning sensation that can last for hours. Trust me, you don't want to accidentally rub your eyes after handling a Carolina Reaper. It's an experience you won't soon forget, and not in a good way. Watering them was a delicate process. I used a gentle spray nozzle to avoid splashing any of the pepper oils onto myself or the surrounding plants. I also made sure to water them early in the morning, so the leaves had plenty of time to dry before the sun got too hot. Fertilizing them required even more caution. I used a diluted liquid fertilizer, applying it carefully to the soil around the base of the plants. I avoided getting any fertilizer on the leaves or peppers, as that could cause them to burn. As the peppers grew, they transformed from small, green buds into menacing-looking red pods. They had a distinctive wrinkled texture and a characteristic scorpion tail at the end, a clear warning of their extreme heat. Harvesting them was the most dangerous part of the entire process. I waited until the peppers were fully ripe, a deep, vibrant red color. Then, I donned a full protective suit, including gloves, safety glasses, and a face mask. I looked like I was about to enter a hazardous waste zone. Using a pair of sharp scissors, I carefully snipped the peppers from the plants, one at a time. I placed them in a plastic container, making sure they didn't touch each other. Even the slightest contact could cause the pepper oils to spread. After harvesting the peppers, I immediately washed my hands and arms with soap and water. I also cleaned the scissors and the plastic container with bleach. I wanted to make sure there were no traces of the pepper oils left behind. I cannot stress enough how important it is to take precautions when handling Carolina Reapers. These peppers are not a toy. They are a serious culinary ingredient that should be treated with respect. If you're not careful, you could end up with a painful burn, or worse. So, please, if you're going to grow Carolina Reapers, do your research, take precautions, and be responsible. And definitely don't leave them lying around where unsuspecting neighbors might accidentally mistake them for tomatoes. That could lead to a very spicy situation. A situation not unlike the one I was hoping Gladys would soon find herself in. The stage was set. The Carolina Reapers were ripe and ready, strategically placed among the unsuspecting tomato plants. The camera was charged and recording. All that was left was to wait for Gladys to take the bait. I didn't have to wait long. Just 2 nights after planting the peppers, my phone buzzed again. Motion detected in garden. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. Operation Spicy Revenge was about to reach its fiery conclusion. I quickly opened the app and watched the live feed. There she was, Gladys, creeping through my garden in the dead of night, her floral robe billowing in the breeze. She looked like a botanical ninja, stealthily navigating her way through the rows of tomato plants. This time, however, I wasn't filled with frustration or anger. I was filled with anticipation, a mischievous glee bubbling up inside me. I knew what was coming, and I couldn't wait to see her reaction. Gladys approached the area where I had planted the Carolina Reapers. She paused for a moment, carefully surveying the scene. She seemed to be looking for the ripest, most perfect tomatoes. And then, she reached out her hand. She hesitated for a second, as if she sensed something was different. But then, she shrugged it off and plucked a bright red pepper from the plant. It was a beauty, perfectly shaped and glistening in the moonlight. It looked almost identical to the beefsteak tomatoes growing nearby. She held it up to her nose and sniffed it, as she had done before. Apparently, it passed the smell test. Satisfied, she placed it in her basket, alongside the other stolen tomatoes. I couldn't help but grin. She had taken the bait. She had fallen right into my spicy trap. Now, all that was left was to see her reaction. I leaned closer to my phone, eager to witness the moment of truth. Gladys continued to pilfer tomatoes for a few more minutes, filling her basket with her ill-gotten gains. Then, she turned and headed back towards her house, disappearing into the shadows. I waited anxiously, wondering when she would take her first bite. Would she eat it right away, in the garden? Or would she wait until she got back inside? Finally, about 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a motion detection notification. It was a sound alert. The camera had picked up a loud, unmistakable shriek. This was followed by a series of coughs, gasps, and frantic exclamations. It sounded like Gladys was having some kind of medical emergency. Operation Spicy Revenge had been a resounding success. And I had it all on video. I immediately rewound the camera footage, eager to witness the full extent of Gladys's spicy ordeal. The video quality wasn't the best, especially in the dark, but it was more than enough to capture the sheer comedic brilliance of what unfolded. The video showed Gladys entering her kitchen, placing the basket of stolen tomatoes on the counter. She grabbed a knife and cutting board, clearly intending to make a midnight snack. She selected one of the larger red fruits, the Carolina Reaper, of course, and sliced it in half. Now, here's where it gets good. Gladys popped one half of the pepper into her mouth, chewing thoughtfully. For a split second, nothing happened. She probably thought she had gotten away with it. Maybe she even thought I was exaggerating about the whole spicy revenge thing. Then, her eyes widened. Her face turned bright red, like the pepper she had just consumed. She started coughing and sputtering, grabbing for a glass of water on the counter. She took a large gulp, but it did little to extinguish the fire that was now raging in her mouth. She started fanning her face with her hands, pacing back and forth across the kitchen. She let out a series of increasingly frantic yelps and cries, her voice cracking with a mixture of pain and disbelief. She ran to the sink and started gulping water straight from the faucet, splashing it all over her face and robe. She looked like she was trying to put out a house fire with a garden hose. At one point, she even tried sticking her head in the freezer, presumably in an attempt to cool down her burning taste buds. It was a truly bizarre sight, like something out of a cartoon. The whole ordeal lasted for several minutes, a symphony of coughing, sputtering, and frantic movements. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Gladys seemed to regain some semblance of composure. She collapsed into a chair, gasping for air, her face still flushed and her eyes watering. She looked utterly defeated, like she had just gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. It was hilarious, I have to admit. But I also felt a twinge of guilt. I hadn't intended to cause her that much discomfort. My plan was more about a mild, momentary shock, not a full-blown culinary meltdown. But then I reminded myself that she had been stealing my tomatoes for weeks, violating my privacy, and generally making my life miserable. She deserved a little bit of discomfort. Besides, it was all for comedic effect, right? No permanent harm done. I saved the video to my phone, knowing that it would be a valuable piece of evidence when I confronted her. But more importantly, it was a reminder that sometimes, a little bit of spicy revenge is exactly what the doctor ordered. Especially when it involves a nosy neighbor, a stolen tomato, and a Carolina Reaper pepper. The next morning, I decided it was time to confront Gladys. I wasn't angry, not really. More amused, if anything. And maybe a little bit proud of my successful spicy trap. I knew I had to approach the situation with humor, not hostility. I didn't want to start a feud that would tear Harmony Glades apart. I just wanted to put an end to the tomato theft and maybe, just maybe, get an apology. I walked over to Gladys's house and rang the doorbell. She answered the door looking a little worse for wear. Her face was still slightly red, and her eyes were puffy. She looked like she hadn't slept well. "Good morning, Gladys," I said, trying to suppress a smile. "How are you feeling today?" Gladys glared at me. "Not well, Alex. Not well at all. I had a very unpleasant experience last night." "Oh, really?" I said, feigning innocence. What happened? Gladys hesitated for a moment, then said, I don't want to talk about it. Come on, Gladys, I said, you can tell me. Maybe I can help. Gladys sighed and said, I ate something, spicy. Very, very spicy. It was like my mouth was on fire. Oh, dear, I said, that sounds terrible. Was it a tomato, perhaps? Gladys's eyes widened. How did you know? I might have an idea, I said, pulling out my phone. Would you like to see some home video? I showed Gladys the video of her sneaking into my garden and stealing the tomatoes. She watched in stunned silence as she carefully selected the ripest fruits, placing them in her basket. Then, I showed her the video of her biting into the Carolina Reaper. Her eyes widened even further as she watched herself cough, sputter, and run around her kitchen like a madwoman. When the video was over, Gladys was speechless. Her face was a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and disbelief. I can explain, she stammered. I'm all ears, I said, trying to keep a straight face. Gladys took a deep breath and said, I know it looks bad, Alex, but I wasn't stealing your tomatoes. I was rescuing them. Rescuing them? I said, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Gladys said. They were unruly. They were growing outside the designated area. They were attracting pests. They were a clear violation of HOA bylaw 4.3b. So, you thought it was your duty to confiscate them? I said. Exactly. Gladys said. I was just trying to uphold the standards of Harmony Glades. And the Carolina Reaper? I said. Was that part of your HOA-approved pest control program? Gladys blushed. Okay, maybe I made a mistake. I thought it was a tomato. I was hungry. I couldn't help but laugh. Gladys, I said, you're incorrigible. But I appreciate your dedication to the HOA. However, I would appreciate it even more if you would leave my tomatoes alone. They're my pride and joy, and I don't appreciate you sneaking into my garden in the middle of the night to steal them. I understand, Gladys said, hanging her head. I'm sorry, Alex. I won't do it again. I appreciate that, Gladys, I said. And in return, I promise to keep my garden a little tidier. Maybe even plant some HOA-approved flowers. Gladys smiled. That would be wonderful, Alex. Thank you. And with that, the Great Tomato War of Harmony Glades came to an end. With a little bit of humor, a little bit of spice, and a whole lot of understanding. Gladys's initial defensiveness quickly crumbled under the weight of the video evidence. The sight of herself, caught red-handed, or red-faced, in this case, seemed to deflate her completely. She went from being the stern HOA president to a sheepish, almost childlike figure. It wasn't just the fact that she had been caught stealing. It was the realization that her actions had been so ridiculous. Seeing herself running around her kitchen, desperately trying to extinguish the fire in her mouth, was clearly a humbling experience. I don't know what to say, Alex, she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I'm so embarrassed. I understand, Gladys, I said, trying to sound sympathetic. But I think it's important to understand why you did what you did. Why were you taking my tomatoes? Gladys hesitated for a moment, then said, it's just, they were so unruly. They were growing outside the designated area. The vines were sprawling everywhere. They were attracting pests. It was a clear violation of HOA guidelines. So, you were just trying to enforce the rules? I said, trying to suppress a smile. Yes. Gladys said, her voice rising slightly. Someone has to uphold the standards of Harmony Glades. Otherwise, everything would descend into chaos. But stealing them in the middle of the night? I said. That seems a little extreme, even for you. Gladys blushed. I know. It was wrong. But I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to confront you directly. I thought I could just, quietly remove the offending tomatoes and no one would be the wiser. And the green ones? I said. Why were you taking the green ones? They were going to ripen eventually, Gladys said. And I didn't want them to spread their unruly genes throughout the neighborhood. I couldn't help but laugh. Unruly genes? I said. Gladys, they're tomatoes, not criminals. Gladys sighed. I know. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. But I just get so caught up in the rules. I feel like it's my duty to make sure everyone is following them. I appreciate your dedication, Gladys, I said. But sometimes, you need to let things go. Sometimes, a little bit of chaos is a good thing. It adds character. It makes life more interesting. I suppose you're right, Gladys said, looking thoughtful. But it's hard for me. I've always been a stickler for the rules. I know, I said. But maybe this experience will teach you to loosen up a little. To let go of the reins every once in a while. Maybe, Gladys said. And I promise, I'll never touch your tomatoes again. Even if they do violate HOA guidelines. Thank you, Gladys, I said. I appreciate that. And with that, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. Gladys had admitted her wrongdoing, apologized for her actions, and promised to change her ways. It wasn't exactly a fairy tale ending, but it was a start. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, Harmony Glades could learn to embrace a little bit of chaos. The conversation with Gladys ended on a surprisingly positive note. We had both aired our grievances, admitted our faults, and found a way to move forward. It was a testament to the power of communication, even in the face of stolen tomatoes and spicy peppers. As I walked back to my house, I started thinking about what Gladys had said about my garden being unruly. I had to admit, she had a point. My tomato plants were a bit of a mess, with vines sprawling in every direction and weeds popping up in unexpected places. Maybe it was time to take her concerns seriously. Not because she was the HOA president, but because she was my neighbor. And because, deep down, I knew that a tidier garden would be a happier garden. So, I decided to make a deal with Gladys. I would agree to keep my garden a little neater and more organized, in exchange for her promise to leave my tomatoes alone. It was a fair compromise, I thought. A win-win situation for both of us. The next day, I got to work. I spent the morning pruning the tomato plants, trimming back the unruly vines and staking them more securely. I also weeded the garden, removing any unwanted plants that were competing with my tomatoes for resources. As I was working, Gladys came over to my fence. "Can I help?" she asked hesitantly. I was surprised by her offer. "Are you sure, Gladys?" I said. "I don't want you to feel like you're obligated to." No, she said. "I want to help. I feel bad about what happened. And I actually enjoy gardening, when it's done properly." So, Gladys and I spent the afternoon working side by side in my garden. She showed me how to properly prune the tomato plants, how to identify and remove common weeds, and how to fertilize the soil. I, in turn, showed her how to appreciate the beauty of a slightly imperfect tomato, the joy of watching a plant grow from a tiny seed, and the satisfaction of sharing the fruits of your labor with others. We even planted a few HOA-approved flowers around the perimeter of the garden, just to appease the neighborhood aesthetic. They were bright and cheerful, adding a splash of color to the otherwise green landscape. It was a strange but wonderful experience. Here we were, two neighbors who had been at odds just a few weeks ago, now working together in perfect harmony. It was a reminder that even the most unlikely people can find common ground, if they're willing to put aside their differences and work towards a common goal. As the sun began to set, we stood back and admired our work. The garden looked neater and more organized, but it still retained its charm and character. It was a perfect blend of order and chaos, a reflection of the compromise that Gladys and I had reached. "It looks beautiful, Alex," Gladys said, smiling. "You've done a wonderful job." "Thanks, Gladys," I said. "We've done a wonderful job." And as I looked at my garden, I realized that it was more than just a collection of tomato plants and flowers. It was a symbol of friendship, understanding, and the power of community. And it was a reminder that sometimes, the best things in life are found in the most unexpected places. Even in a strictly regulated HOA neighborhood, where a little bit of spice can go a long way. Looking back on the Great Tomato War of Harmony Glades, I can't help but chuckle. It's funny how something as simple as a few stolen tomatoes could lead to such a bizarre and unexpected chain of events. A hidden camera, a spicy pepper, and a whole lot of HOA drama. It's the kind of story that could only happen in a place like Harmony Glades, where the rules are so strict that they often become absurd. The whole experience taught me a few valuable lessons. First, never underestimate the power of a well-placed Carolina Reaper. Second, communication is key, even with your nosiest neighbors. And third, sometimes, the best way to resolve a conflict is with a little bit of humor and a whole lot of forgiveness. I've also learned to appreciate the absurdity of HOA rules. While they can be frustrating at times, they also provide a certain level of order and stability. And they can be a great source of comedic material, if you know how to look at them the right way. As for Gladys, she's become a surprisingly good friend. We still tease each other about the tomato incident, but it's all in good fun. She's even started to loosen up a bit, embracing a little bit of chaos in her own life. She still patrols the neighborhood in her golf cart, but she's a little less quick to issue warnings. And she's even been known to crack a smile or two. The Carolina Reapers are long gone, replaced with more HOA-approved flowers. But the memory of Gladys's fiery reaction still brings a smile to my face. It was a moment of pure comedic gold, a testament to the power of spicy revenge. And the tomato garden? It's thriving, thanks to Gladys's expert gardening advice. It's a little tidier, a little more organized, but it still retains its charm and character. It's a symbol of the unlikely friendship that blossomed between two neighbors who were once at odds. In the end, the Great Tomato War of Harmony Glades wasn't about tomatoes at all. It was about finding common ground, about understanding each other's perspectives, and about learning to laugh at ourselves. It was about forgiving each other's flaws and embracing each other's strengths. And it was about realizing that even in the most strictly regulated communities, there's always room for a little bit of spice, a little bit of humor, and a whole lot of heart. So, if you ever find yourself in a conflict with your neighbor, remember my story. And remember that sometimes, the best way to resolve a dispute is with a little bit of forgiveness, a little bit of understanding, and maybe, just maybe, a Carolina Reaper pepper. But please, use them responsibly. After all, we're all just trying to make the best of things, even in Harmony Glades. And sometimes, that means learning to laugh together, even when our mouths are on fire.